So this book here, as you can probably tell by just kind of how beat up it is my favourite piece of fiction ever written. To me, it's absolutely flawless. The characters, the world, the story, the twists and turns in the plots, the lore, everything is just flawless. The movie of The Fellowship of the Ring came out in 2001, and that was when I was 12 years old. And as soon as that film had finished, I went out and I bought this. And it's safe to say, I'm a fan for life. Before 2001 though, Lord of the Rings had an interesting history when it came to films and, more importantly, video games. To date, there has certainly been a lot of them, and I won't be covering absolutely every single one here because it's just too much. But we'll take a look at some of the ones I've played and some of the oddities and absolute best games in the Lord of the Rings franchise. We won't be covering anything that's a spin-off though, so nothing from The Hobbit or anything like that. So let's start all the way back at the beginning in 1983. This is Lord of the Rings Journey to Rivendell on the Atari 2600. What's most interesting about this game, I think, is that it was never actually released. It was officially listed in production by the Parker brothers, but it never hit store shelves. That is until around 20 years down the line, code for the game appeared online, thanks to a former employee, and an image of the prototype cartridge surfaced as well. After playing it, the game is actually surprisingly complete, and there is even a concept box art image showing the villains of the game. It very much has the art style of the 1978 animated movie, which unsurprisingly isn't actually replicated in the game. The goal of the game is to get Frodo from Hobbiton to Rivendell with the ring. You are chased by what looks like crows and the Nazgul. Some of the main characters from the book make an appearance, with Sam, Aragorn, Gandalf, Tom Bombadil and Glorfindel. Meeting these characters also gives you abilities which help you survive just a little bit longer. The game is quite bare bones in content, but is still an impressive feat for the 2600 game. It never hit shelves due to a license clash over content ownership rights, but it's still worth playing it just to see where it all began. Next up, let's take a look at Lord of the Rings Game 1. This is also known as Fellowship of the Rings, as that is when the game is actually set. It was on most PC-based formats available at the time when it was released in 1985, and the footage you see here is of the ZX Spectrum version. It was a turn-based text adventure following the Four Hobbits. It originally came in two parts, with the first having Frodo and friends make their way through the Shire and onto Rivendell. In the second part, you were the full Fellowship up until the end of the first book. The game is typical for text adventures of the time, with quite confusing puzzles that had obscure solutions, and you never had a full grasp of what the game actually wanted you to do. There was some really nice rendering on environments for the time though, and for people who are a fan of text adventure games, there's a lot to love here. Following the ZX Spectrum game, there's a few other games, including Shadow of Mordor, which was also a text adventure game, and also War in Middle-earth and Riders of Rohan, which were early examples of strategy games at different parts of the novel's timeline. The next game we're going to take a look at, though, is the last game to be released before the first film came out in 2001, and that is Lord of the Rings Part 1 on the Super Nintendo. You know, I don't actually know where to start with this one, to be honest. You know when your parents tell you, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed? That's kind of how I feel about this one. It could have been like a really cool game. I'd be on board with a Zelda clone in the Lord of the Rings universe, but sadly that's not really what we got with this one. The main problem is everything is so slow, and it feels really sluggish to play. The game plays out across the first book, with you controlling Frodo and gradually recruiting the Fellowship. And when I say gradually, I mean gradually. This is my main problem I have with this game. You're in possession of a ring, which controls the fate of the world, and you essentially have the most important job in the world, so why do I have to recruit the other hobbits by doing fetch quests for them? The devs clearly intended to extend the longevity of the game by including fetch quests, but they're so monotonous it's infuriating. This is made even worse by the lack of an in-game map, so you have no idea where you're going and where you've already been. So many of the areas look absolutely identical, especially the caves, so when NPCs ask you to find an item that is in a cave, you have no idea whether you've already been there or if you haven't. This game was released towards the twilight of the Super Nintendo's life cycle, and for its time it isn't a particularly visually impressive game. Link to the Past was released 3 years previous to this, and the quality difference is just night and day. The caves and dungeons, they all look the same, and there's just far too much brown for my liking. The one saving grace for this game, though, is the music. Charles Denon's score is fantastic, and it set the mood perfectly for stabbing random snakes and wolves out in the wilderness. I'll put a link to that soundtrack in the description below, so you can check it out if you're interested in hearing it, and you absolutely should. This game had so much potential, it's a shame how it turned out, but sadly that's how many games with drawn out and troubled development cycles end up. But guess what? 7 years later, this came out. And when this came out, everything changed for Lord of the Rings games. The franchise became a global phenomenon, and video games based on the quest to destroy the ring were more in demand than ever before. So in the next part of this series, we're going to jump over to the PS2 entries, and that's where the real fun begins. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.